Sometimes this story just completely flips. We're seeing that right now with the Lula government and this whole INSS fraud investigation.
Right.
I mean, first they seemed pretty reluctant, didn't they? But now they're backing a full parliamentary inquiry, a CPMI.
Yeah, it's quite the turnaround, a real strategic shift.
So what's really going on? What's the play here? And importantly, what do you need to understand about this whole thing as it unfolds so quickly?
Exactly. And this isn't just, political games. This is serious. It's about Social Security. It affects real people, retirees.
Absolutely.
So today, in this deep dive, we're really digging into this INSS fraud story in Brazil. We'll look at how the government's position changed, unpack these competing stories about who's to blame.
And what it actually means.
And what it means for you, the listener, trying to make sense of it all. We've gone through the news reports, the commentary, trying to pull out the crucial bits.
Okay, so let's start with that big U-turn. What was the government's initial position on investigating the INSS fraud? Why the hesitation?
Well, initially, the Lula administration was clearly resistant. They didn't seem keen on a big parliamentary inquiry, a CPI or CPMI.
And the reason? To avoid disruption.
That seemed to be the public line, yeah. Focus on the agenda, avoid political turmoil, keep things moving.
Right, keep the focus elsewhere. But then things changed. What was the trigger?
The big shift happened when the opposition managed to get enough signatures in both the chamber and the Senate.
Oh, okay.
Once they had the numbers, the inquiry became basically mandatory. It didn't matter what the government initially wanted.
So it was going to happen anyway.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
You had figures like Fernando Henrique Cardoso, FHC, saying it was just inevitable at that point, given the rules, the precedent.
Inevitable. Okay. So the government backing it now, is that less about transparency and more about damage control? Strategy.
And that's certainly how a lot of analysts see it. It looks like a calculated move. If you can't stop it, join it.
And try to steer it.
Exactly. Get involved, influence the narrative, and crucially, try to point the finger at the previous administration. Shift the blame for the fraud onto Bolsonaro's government.
The classic political maneuver. And how are they planning to do that? Any specifics? Are they targeting certain people?
Well, the reported strategy involves calling key people from the Bolsonaro era to testify.
Oh, interesting. Like who?
Names like Paulo Guedes, the former economy minister, and Onyx Lorenzoni, former chief of staff, have been floated.
Okay.
The idea would be to, probe their time in office, look for any weaknesses or decisions that might have allowed this fraud to flourish or increase.
Got it. So less focus maybe on who's doing it now, more on who might have let it start or get worse then. Let's dig into what the experts are saying. FHC called it inevitable. What was his reasoning?
Well, Cardoso's perspective, it seems, comes from experience. He mentioned the sheer size of the alleged fraud, but also historical parallels, like the COVID CPI. He pointed out how even a minority in Congress could force that inquiry. Basically, once the procedural requirements are met, it's very hard for the Senate leadership to just block it. He even recalled asking the Senate president about it back then.
So political reality based on past fights. Now, Marina Franceschini at Globo News, she had some points that seemed to complicate the government's narrative, right? Especially about when the fraud grew.
Yes, Franceschini really highlighted a key tension. The government story is this started back in 2019 under Bolsonaro, but she pointed out data suggesting the volume of fraud actually went up significantly during the current Lula government.
Ouch. That kind of clashes with the zero tolerance for corruption message, doesn't it?
It does. It's a difficult point for them, claiming zero tolerance while the problem appears to be getting worse on your watch.
Did she say anything about when the investigations actually started?
Yes, that was another critical point. She emphasized that these investigations really only picked up steam, got public attention, after the media started reporting heavily on the fraud.
So, not exactly proactive.
It raises that question, definitely. How much was being done before the press got involved? And she also mentioned pressure building from within the government's own base.
How so?
Politicians aligned with the government are hearing from their constituents, the people back home, who are demanding action for the retirees who've been cheated. That grassroots anger adds another layer of pressure.
Especially with elections always seeming to be just around the corner. Okay, Gerson Camerati, also Globo News, he had a slightly different angle on the government's strategy shift involving the courts, the STF.
Yeah, Camerati suggested the government's change of heart was partly tactical to avoid getting boxed in by the Supreme Federal Court, the STF.
How would the STF get involved?
His argument was that if the Senate leadership kept stalling the CPI, even with enough signatures, the opposition could appeal to the STF. And based on past feelings about the right to inquiry?
The court might have ordered it to proceed.
Exactly. So according to Camerati, the government decided to get ahead of that, support the CPI, rather than look like they were forced into it by the judges.
Makes sense. Control the process from the inside.
Right. Get a seat at the table, shape the narrative, and try to, as he put it, level the playing field by making sure Bolsonaro's administration gets scrutinized too.
Okay, a strategic calculation. Now, Helio Beltran at CNN, he offered a very different timeline and pointed fingers in another direction entirely, didn't he?
Yes. Beltran's take really shakes things up. He argued this whole issue of fraudulent deductions didn't just start with Bolsonaro. He claims it was happening back in Dilma Rousseff's time, around 2016.
2016, way back.
And he asserted it actually got worse under the current Lula government and involved unions with ties to the left.
Left-leaning unions. Okay, that definitely complicates the simple left versus right blame game. Did he mention any specific policies?
He did. He pointed to something called Provisional Measure 871, MP 871, from the Bolsonaro years.
What was that supposed to do?
Beltran claimed its purpose was specifically to find and fix these kinds of irregularities. And importantly, stop automatic payroll deductions for certain entities, aiming to tighten the screws on potential fraud.
Okay, so if that was in place, why didn't it stop the problem? Or why did it reportedly get worse later?
Well, according to Beltran, Congress actually relaxed the controls from MP 871 near the end of 2022.
Relax them. Who supported that?
He alleges it had support from both the PT, Lula's party, and the Centrum, that big bloc of centrist parties. He argues this loosening of the rules basically opened the door for more fraud.
Wow. He also mentioned some specific interactions, didn't he, about requests to loosen controls?
Yes, this is quite detailed. He claimed that Rogério Marinho, who was Bolsonaro's Secretary of Social Security, actually rejected a request.
Rejected what?
A request from Paulinho da Força and SINAPI. That's a union where Lula's brother is reportedly vice president, who apparently wanted fewer controls and even wanted unions to be able to grant benefits themselves. Marinho apparently said no.
Okay, so a rejection under Bolsonaro. But then what?
Beltran then claims that the current minister, Lupi, under Lula, received a similar request from SINAPI and seemed to approve relaxing controls.
So completely different responses alleged across administrations. This paints a picture of, well, regulatory battles and influence attempts from various sides.
It certainly suggests a complex history, not easily fitting into one administration's box.
But, with all this back and forth, this political chess game, what about the actual victims, the retirees? It feels like they're getting lost.
That's a really crucial point, and yeah, it often feels like it gets drowned out by the political noise. The focus should be on the people harmed, the retirees who had money wrongly taken from their pensions.
Absolutely.
But the urgency seems to be more about assigning blame, scoring political points, rather than, finding the criminals, stopping the fraud now, and getting the money back to the pensioners.
It's incredibly frustrating to think about. The real human cost seems secondary sometimes.
It really does. The political fight takes center stage, and the victims wait.
Okay, let's look at a concrete example that came up, these allegations involving SINAPI and BMG Bank. It helps illustrate how this might have actually worked on the ground.
Yes, the reporting from Metropols gave a specific alleged mechanism. SINAPI, the National Union of Retirees, Pensioners, and the elderly of Força Sindical.
The one with Lula's brother, reportedly as VP?
That's the one. The allegation is that they were signing up retirees as members, but without the retirees' consent.
Ow. Where?
Apparently, this was happening at BMG Bank correspondent agencies. Retirees would go there, often looking for payroll loans.
Okay.
And somehow, during that process, they'd allegedly get signed up for SINAPI membership without realizing it.
So you go for a loan, you walk out unknowingly paying union dues. What happens then?
The direct result is money gets deducted from their INSS payments, unauthorized deductions showing up as union dues going to SINAPI.
That's awful.
And the report also mentioned that this particular BMG agency apparently had a history of issues with illegal deductions, suggesting it wasn't maybe an isolated incident. It really highlights how vulnerable people can be.
It sounds predatory, frankly, taking advantage of people needing financial help.
Yeah.
And then on top of all this, the Minister of Social Security asked for more money. How does that fit in?
Yeah, that request caused quite a stir. The minister asked for additional funds, billions of raise.
To do what?
The stated purpose was to cover the losses from the fraud, to basically plug the hole in the budget caused by the stolen money.
But wait, so use taxpayer money to cover funds that were stolen? Essentially from taxpayers. via the Social Security system.
That's exactly the concern people raised. It sounds like asking the public to pay twice, once through the fraud and again to cover the losses. It brings up huge questions about accountability, who ultimately pays for this mess.
It really does. Okay, so let's try to wrap this up. Key takeaways seem to be: government resisted, then strategically supported the inquiry, probably to manage blame.
Right. And we have these clashing stories about when the fraud really took off and who's more responsible. Bolsonaro's time, Lula's time, maybe even earlier.
And amidst all this political fighting, the actual victims, the retirees, seem like an afterthought, which is the real tragedy here.
Absolutely. Plus, that specific Sinop BMG case gives a glimpse into how it might have happened, involving a union with links to the president's family, and then the request for more public money just adds another layer of controversy.
So for you listening, the main thing is probably to look past the shouting matches, right? Consider the facts coming from these different sources.
Definitely. You need to weigh the evidence, look at the timelines presented, and see how the different pieces fit together, or don't fit. It's complex.
Okay, so here's something for you to think about as this develops. Given all these conflicting stories, the alleged involvement of different groups across political lines, what does this whole mess tell us about the system itself? How robust are the checks and balances within Brazil's social security system, really?
That's the core question, isn't it?
And maybe more importantly, what fundamental changes are actually needed to protect vulnerable people, the retirees, from this kind of massive fraud happening again? What are the key questions you should be asking your representatives, the media, everyone involved, as this investigation moves forward?